Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm still freezing cold down here. You know, winter is finally nearing its end, but it's clinging on. Midwest folks, hang in there. We're gonna get through this together, okay? It will be warm again one day. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about Lunar, the Silver Star Story Complete, and Lunar Eternal Blue Complete, the remastered editions coming very soon from Gung Ho Entertainment. I'm beyond thrilled that these games are getting a second chance at life, third chance, fourth chance in some cases. Regardless, they're getting another chance, a much bigger chance, I think, than they've had since the PlayStation 1. And these games very much deserve another chance in the spotlight. Very excited about that. Now, the original remakes of these games, the PlayStation 1 releases, have a very special place in my heart, and I'm sure that's true of a lot of people around my age that grew up when these games came out, experienced them at the moment. Like, they were very much a product of the time, right? They were so nostalgic. Even then, even when they came out, they felt nostalgic to me. And I think that that's the case even today. I replayed Lunar Silver Star Story Complete maybe 3 years ago, two or 3 years ago at this point. Yeah. And like, it's just the feelings that it evoked in me at the time, I still feel them today. It's a very nostalgic game. One of the things that I always liked about the Lunar games on the PlayStation 1 was the working designs localization. Now, hang on. I know a lot of you are probably furious at the idea that I could have liked the working designs localizations, because after all, working designs just ran roughshod over the entire script, right? They just kind of wrote whatever they wanted, replaced lines with lines that had nothing to do with what the original said, put jokes in there, pop culture references, Bill Clinton jokes in a fantasy RPG in the 90s. You know, like, it's crazy, right? Like, that shouldn't be. That's not the way localization is supposed to go, right? Well, that reputation that Working Designs developed based on their localizations followed them pretty much throughout the entirety of their existence. So the Lunar Remastered collection is not going to have the Working Designs localization, right? And I guess to me, as a fan of the original Lunar games, I'm bummed that we won't have that option, right? Like, that just kind of sucks. Like, it's not the end of the world. I'm still very glad that we're getting the Lunar games in this remastered form, but it does kind of suck that we can't have that, like, definitive edition of the games. Give us the new localization for sure, but, like, it's kind of a bummer that we don't have those Working Designs localization. I'm not here to say that I agree with every choice they made, that everything they did was the best, 100% A+, no notes, okay? But I am here, I think, to defend them a little bit. Let me get into it. First of all, localization is adaptation. It always is. Localization is always about adapting an original work for a new audience, right? Now, the level of that adaptation can vary, right? There are different levels at which you can choose to adapt a work from one language into another. Taking a piece of media from its original language and moving it into another language is always adaptation. Even a literal word for word, quote unquote, word for word translation is still adaptation. You are still adapting it, because if you choose to adapt something literally, quote unquote, again, word for word, quote unquote, you are still presenting the text, presenting the dialogue in a way that is different than the original audience received it, right? It's different, not just because the language is different, but because the form of communication has changed. It just has, and that always happens. That's why localization, translation, it's always adaptation at some level. The reason that adaptation has to happen is because cultures and languages can be so different from each other. And it's hard to imagine languages and cultures that are more different from each other than English and Japanese, okay? Just extraordinarily different in terms of values, among other things, right? It's a different society than the one we live in here in the West. And so if we are to take a work from Japanese and bring it over to the West and translate it into English or French or German, any other language in the Western world, a level of adaptation is always going to happen because there are certain aspects of Japanese life, Japanese culture, that the average Westerner is not going to understand. I'm not talking to the heavy class weebs here, right? Like, I am a heavy class weeb. I probably understand a lot of that stuff. If they just threw something like that into a script, I would probably know what they're talking about because I've been exposed to this stuff. I've been immersed in this stuff pretty much for my entire life, right? So it's not weird to me. It's not a shock to me. But to your average consumer, it's going to be weird. It's going to be shocking. It's going to pull them out of the experience. And do you see, like, that's part of the reason that adaptation is necessary, because if the average Western viewer is watching a show or playing a game and something happens that is so outside of their experience that it takes them out of the experience, then right there, you are giving that player or that viewer an experience that's drastically different than the original audience experienced. If we're taken out of it because we don't understand something, we are having not just a different experience to the original audience, but an inferior experience, right? The way I view this is that there are basically 3 different levels of adaptation or localization. Level 1 is be as literal as possible, okay? This is basically what you would get from a machine translation, right? You plug the Japanese script into ChatGPT or whatever, and you say, spit out this script in English, please, and thank you. And ChatGPT thinks for a minute, boils the ocean, and then spits out, a script that reads comprehensibly in English, okay? So you have a literal word for word, thought for thought sort of translation. Okay, that's level 1. Level 2, I would say, is a localization, an adaptation that adjusts for the new audience that it's being presented to. Okay, so that is most of modern localization in video games today, which it is great in my opinion. I think personally that this level of adaptation that we have kind of decided as a market in the West here as a culture is what we want. Like, it's leaps and bounds better than what we had back in the 80s and the 90s and even the 2000s to an extent. Like, we are in such a better place now when it comes to localizations, in my opinion, because localizers are not just providing this sort of literal, rushed, word for word sort of translation. They're taking into account cultural differences and levels of understanding of these things and making sure that all of that is brought over and transformed in such a way that we as the Western audience are having an experience that is as close as possible to how the original Japanese audience experienced it. So that's level 2. Level 3 is, I'll call it making it their own. Okay. And that is where working designs would fall in. Working designs would take a script written by the Japanese creators of the game, and they would take a look at it and say, okay, this plot, the general direction of things, we can't really stray from that because, the characters are going to be in these places and they're going to go and do these things and they're going to meet these people. There's only so much that can be changed here because they're adapting an existing work. But everything else in between, all of the details, all of the characters and relationships and dialogue that's going to happen along the way, we're just going to kind of make it up. All right. I'm not privy to, how they made their decisions, but I think you understand, like, they were very loose with how they interpreted the script and brought it over to a Western audience. Now, there are some, I think, very obvious and clear arguments against this sort of style of adaptation, right? What if I, as the intended audience here in the West, wanted to experience the story and the characters the way the original creators wrote them to be? What if that's what I wanted? Well, then unfortunately, I'm kind of out of luck with this style of localization. Also, if I am feeling kind of really annoyed by it, I might even see it as outwardly disrespectful of the original work itself. If, someone took a work that I made and said, I don't really like this, I'm going to just change it all and release it over in this other country in this different language. The stuff he made, not very good. I'm going to make it better and we'll put it out over here. I could see that as being viewed somewhat as disrespect. The argument that I think is most pertinent in favor of working designs and the style that they chose to use in their strategy is just that it was fun. Like, it was just really fun. It was really good. It really opened up the games that they chose to bring over. It made them broadly appealing, right? There is something to be said for crafting stories, crafting localized works in such a way where the intention is to make them appealing to a broad Western audience. I don't think that that's inherently bad. And so what working designs did is controversial, sure. Debatable, absolutely. I think people can feel differently about working designs, localizations, and localizations like working designs. They can respectfully disagree about these things, and I think that's totally fine. But I think that what they did was a net positive for the JRPG industry in the West. Here's the situation. Here's the issue as I view it today. So working designs, like I said, is at that level 3, that completely making it their own localization. My personal preference for localized works is level 2, right? That level where they're not completely changing and disrespecting the original work. They are just adapting it fully so that I, as a Western audience member, have the same experience or as close as the same experience as possible to the original Japanese audience. That's my preference. The issue as I see it today is that some people view what's happening in those situations with, like, the Trails series. Recently, Trails Through Daybreak 2 came out, and there was some controversy around the localization in Trails Through Daybreak 2. They view localizations like that are firmly, in my opinion, at that level 2 as being a level 3 localization. I've heard them say, some people commented on some videos like, I can't wait to see the Western fanfic of Trails Through Daybreak 2. Because they view it as it's being completely rewritten from the ground up with no respect to the original author's intent or work at all. That is just, that's provably false, for one thing. Like, that's not what's happening there. But the sentiment, regardless of whether it's true or not, the sentiment is still resonating with some people. And I think that that's unfortunate because the level of localization that we have, like I said earlier, broadly kind of agreed upon as the broader market here in the West is actually so much better than what we had in the early days, and even better than what working designs and companies like that were able to produce, just kind of going off and doing their own thing. Like, what we have now is we have localization that legitimately does care about and loves the original work, but is able to present it to us in a way that it resonates emotionally with us in the same, or at least very similar, as close to the same as possible ways that it did with that original audience. That is the key experience. I don't care whether the words coming out of the Japanese actor's mouth are word for word what the English actor says. I don't care about that, because words are not just letters on a page, right? Words are only as useful insofar as they communicate meaning from one person to another. And if you take a literal word for word translation of something said in Japanese and present that rough, raw translation to me as an English speaker, I am not taking the same meaning away from that sentence or whatever as the original Japanese audience, right? It's just, it's impossible. Like, we don't talk that way. And also, like, in my mind, there's no reason that Japanese media, when localized, there's no reason it shouldn't sound good. There's no reason it shouldn't sound like it was written here originally. I think that is the ideal situation, personally. There's just no reason that Japanese media, as presented here in the West, shouldn't be as well written as media that is created here. It should sound like it was written here. It should sound like it was written for us. And I think For the most part, modern localization is doing that. And they are not taking it to the extreme that Working Designs did, but they are still giving us well-written dialogue, well-acted performances that communicate the same emotional intent as the original. Here's the thing. We live in, broadly speaking, a capitalistic society. And so the market plays an enormous role in deciding what companies do, right? And when you talk about the different levels of localization, down at level 1, the kind of literal word for word localization, the market for that, the market of people that want that is unfortunately, not unfortunately for me as far as I'm concerned, but it's not big enough to justify abandoning the rest of the audience that cares about games sounding and reading and feeling a certain way, right? It's just not worth it to abandon the majority of people that either don't pay attention to the localization but know a bad written script when they see one, or the people that do pay attention and still prefer the more fully localized and adapted version of the story. And I know a lot of this stuff has become very political, which is weird to me. Politics has more than ever, I think, become this team sport where, your team right now is rooting for this particular social topic, whatever. And so any game or movie or TV show that promotes this other thing is something that you have to be against, and vice versa, right? It's not just one side of the political spectrum or the other that does this. They both do it. And to me, it's just wow, you're just missing out on so many cool things because your political team told you need to be mad about this particular thing right now. 10 years from now, you're not even going to care about any of that crap. The world is moving so fast. All of the stuff that you're up in arms about, whether it's woke this or whatever, you're not even gonna care about it in 10 years, And maybe you'll come back and play these games that you skipped out on 10 years down the road, but I don't know, why not have fun with them while everybody else is playing them? That's kind of my thing, is I want to experience these games when my friends are experiencing them, when other people online are experiencing them. I want to be able to talk about them. So I don't know. What's a solution that would satisfy everybody? I don't know if there is one, honestly, right? You can't absolutely satisfy everybody. If we were to have games that gave us the option to choose a machine translated script versus a human adapted script, right? Maybe that would be something, I don't think that would ever happen. I don't know what the upside is for, the companies involved. I don't know, maybe, right? So my preference, obviously, is for the level 2, right? The adapted work that is, brought over to English and adjusted so that I can understand it and have the same experience that the original audience did. My next choice, if I had to choose between the other two options as my fallback, would be level 3, would be the Working Design style. And I understand why that's probably infuriating to some people. And I totally get the arguments against it. As much as I'm involved in the discourse around localization, since I've been on YouTube and been vocal about how I feel about localization, I can understand the arguments against the Working Design style so much more than I can understand the arguments in favor of replacing localizers with AI and machine translation and stuff like that. I am the people that are hey, I don't like Working Designs translations because they did X, Y, and Z. I'm yeah, I'm with you. I understand why you feel that way. But having said that, I still would choose a Working Design localization over a machine translated literal word for word sort of localization any day. I would take it any day of the week, because for me, at the end of the day, I want to have the best possible experience with the game that I'm playing, with the story that I'm experiencing. I know from personal experience, having played games with very poor literal word for word translations, that my experience is significantly diminished by those sorts of localizations. They just are. I just do not like that at all. It does not work for me. If it works for you, I would say that's cool. But like I said, it's not really happening as much anymore, right? It's not prevalent in the market nowadays to have these literal machine translated localizations. So you're not really like sitting pretty. You're not eating well in this day and age, right? You are obviously totally free to prefer that. And you have your reasons for liking what you like, and I have my reasons for liking what I like. And at the end of the day, that's fine. Like, everybody's free to like what they like. But, when somebody gets upset and goes after a localizer, obviously that's where we draw the line, right? We're not freaking animals. Like, we're people. So, like, we can't act like stupid animals, right? Like, we need to like treat people with respect, even if we disagree with them. Like, that's you can't threaten people because of the way they translated a video game you wanted to play. Like, it's silly, but it's also like scary, like get help kind of situation. You know what I mean? Going after a localizer because a character in a modern video game uses the word Rizz, and that's somehow the most horrible thing that's ever happened. Even though, from the perspective of adaptation, the character that says the word Rizz would 100% be the sort of person who would unironically use the word Rizz. Yes, 100%, without a doubt, that is true. So, to me, what reads to them as like this infuriating example of localizer overreach, to me just reads like, yeah, this is a dorky kid who is like using goofy slang that us olds don't really get. It's reads perfectly to me. But I understand it's not going to be the same for everybody. I'm not telling you how to feel about the use of the word Rizz in a localization or anything. I'm not telling you how to feel about anything. I'm just saying that, there are these different ways to look at localization. And to me, since all localization is adaptation anyway, the way that makes the most sense to me is to adapt it. If you're already adapting it, which you are, if you are bringing it from Japanese to English, you are adapting the work one way or the other. Why not give us the experience that provides the closest parallel to the emotional experience the Japanese audience had? Because that's what stories do. They move us, right? They don't just convey information to us. They move us. They are supposed to make us feel certain things. We should feel a certain way about these characters and what they're going through. And the localization very much has probably the most power over how closely our feelings mirror the original audience's feelings. And if a localizer is doing their job right, we are, as much as humanly possible, experiencing the same emotions that the original audience experienced when they played the game. And I think that the modern localization movement that we have today, for the most part, not that anybody's perfect, but for the most part, is doing a fantastic job of that. And I couldn't personally be more grateful, because I've been through the dark times. And like I said, even as much as I enjoy reading the working designs localizations, I'm happy that we found a way to create compelling and well-written scripts that stick close to and respect the intent of the original without going so far as to just use a Japanese to English dictionary and word for word translate everything in a way that is going to alienate probably more than 60 or 70% of the Western audience. So anyway, that's a whole lot about localization. And I hope that you enjoyed this video. I don't know. I feel like if you disagree with me, and you watched it until the end, mad respect, because I know how, much of a hot button issue this is. And if you were sitting there seething, but you still heard me out until the end, that is what we need to do for each other. I like literally, I am so grateful for that if that is you, because that is what we need to do. We need to be willing to listen to each other. Even if we walk away still disagreeing, if we can do it with a smile and if we can be kind to each other, I think that that's what we need. That's what we all need right now, is just to be able to disagree on things, especially things like this, right? That are just about entertainment and don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Like, if we're being realistic, it's video games, right? It's not world peace or whatever. It's just video games. We're just having fun. So we can agree or we can disagree. And if you stuck with me this long, regardless, I really do appreciate you. If you wouldn't mind liking the video if you liked it, or disliking the video if you disliked it, I understand. That's fine. That's fair. That would mean a lot to me. Just the fact that you're taking the time to engage with the video in some way, even if it's just clicking the like or dislike, I really appreciate that. It means a lot. Comment, of course, below if you want to share your thoughts. And, you know, I know that I'm going to have some nasty ones down there. So long as you're not being abusive to me or to others, I'm not going to delete your comment. You know what I mean? If you strongly disagree with me and think I'm a poop, that's okay. As long as you're not being abusive or whatever, I'm not going to mess with your comments. I'll leave them there. So you can share your thoughts on the whole thing. I think that's fine. And if you are interested in the content I make covering JRPGs and things like that, I would love it if you would consider subscribing and maybe even turning on the bell, just because, you know, YouTube's not always perfect at getting the videos when they come out in front of you. And so the subscription would just really mean a lot. Also, if you have not already checked it out, I have a podcast that I do with a couple of friends called the JRPG Pursuit. We put out episodes every week where we talk about topics in the world of JRPGs. I think we might also be doing a show very soon, depending on when this comes out. Either it will have recently come out or it will soon be coming out, on the topic of localization. So if you don't want to just hear me gab about it for a long time, you can tune into that and see how some other people think about it as well. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing and doing all the stuff you do. And until next time, bye.